Some people walk into a room and instantly attract attention with confidence, power, or beauty. But empaths attract people in a completely different way. Their energy feels safe, calm, understanding, and without realizing it, they become emotional magnets for people carrying pain, chaos, manipulation, and emotional emptiness. The disturbing part is that this pattern is not random at all. Psychology shows that deeply empathetic people often send unconscious emotional signals that toxic personalities can recognize almost immediately. That is why so many empaths keep finding themselves trapped in one-sided friendships, emotionally draining relationships, and connections that slowly destroy their peace while they keep trying to save everyone else. The scary truth is that kindness alone does not protect a person. In many cases, it actually attracts people looking for comfort, control, validation, or emotional supply. And most empaths do not notice it until the damage is already done. In this video, you will understand why emotionally damaged people become attached to empaths so quickly, why toxic personalities feel strangely comfortable around kind people, how trauma bonding keeps empaths stuck in painful cycles, and the hidden psychological trait that makes empaths ignore red flags even when the warning signs are obvious. You will also discover why some people secretly envy empathetic individuals while pretending to admire them, and how empaths can finally protect their energy without becoming cold or heartless. Some of these psychological patterns are rarely talked about openly because they force people to confront uncomfortable truths about relationships, emotional attachment, and human behavior. So stay until the end because one realization in this video may completely change the way you see the people around you. Welcome to the Silent Empath, where we explore the hidden psychology behind human behavior, emotional intelligence, and toxic relationships. Subscribe now and become more aware of the energy you allow into your life. Most people misunderstand what an empath's aura really is. It is not magic. It is not some glowing spiritual force floating around a person. In psychology, what people call an aura is often emotional presence. It is the feeling someone creates without trying. Some people create tension the moment they walk into a room. Others create distance, but empaths create emotional safety. Their body language feels calm. Their reactions feel soft instead of threatening. Their attention feels real. And in a world where most conversations are shallow, rushed, and self-centered, emotional presence becomes powerful, without the empath even noticing it. People feel it almost immediately. That is why strangers often start sharing personal stories with empaths very quickly, sometimes within minutes, sometimes without understanding why. The empath may think they are simply being polite, but the other person experiences something much deeper. They feel heard. They feel emotionally visible. And for many people, that feeling is extremely rare. Most individuals spend their lives hiding parts of themselves. They filter emotions, they suppress pain, they protect insecurities. But empaths naturally create an environment where emotional walls begin to drop. Their listening style is different. They do not only hear words. They notice tone changes, facial expressions, energy shifts, emotional tension, silence. Small emotional reactions most people ignore completely. This makes others feel deeply understood. And understanding is one of the strongest emotional experiences a human being can feel. Studies in psychology repeatedly show that emotional validation creates immediate emotional attachment because the brain associates feeling understood with safety and connection. This is why people often become emotionally attached to empaths faster than normal. The empath is not trying to create dependency, but their emotional awareness accidentally becomes comforting to people who feel emotionally alone. There is another reason this emotional presence feels so powerful. Empaths usually do not judge people immediately. They try to understand behavior before reacting to it. While most people respond quickly with criticism, impatience, or defensiveness, empaths pause and try to see the emotional reason behind someone's actions. This creates a sense of acceptance, and acceptance is emotionally addictive for wounded people, especially people who feel rejected by the world. When someone spends years feeling misunderstood, emotionally ignored, or internally broken, meeting an empath feels almost unreal. It feels like relief, like finally putting down emotional weight they have been carrying for years. But the dangerous part is that emotionally healthy people and emotionally unhealthy people react to this feeling very differently. Healthy people appreciate emotional safety. They value it, they respect it, they feel comforted by it, but emotionally damaged people often become attached to it in unhealthy ways, because instead of seeing the empath as an equal person, they begin seeing them as emotional rescue. This is where emotional attraction becomes dangerous. Some people do not approach empaths because they genuinely want connection. They approach because they desperately need emotional regulation. They need someone calm because internally they feel chaotic. They need someone understanding because they refuse to understand themselves. They need someone emotionally stable because they are emotionally unstable. And the empath becomes the perfect target without realizing it. This is why so many empaths constantly attract emotionally heavy people. People with unresolved trauma, people with anger issues, people with narcissistic traits, people addicted to attention, people who constantly create emotional drama, people who drain others emotionally. The empath's energy feels like emotional water to someone emotionally dehydrated. And psychology explains this very clearly. Human beings naturally move toward environments that reduce emotional discomfort. When someone feels empty, insecure, anxious, emotionally abandoned, or internally disconnected, they are automatically drawn toward people who make them feel emotionally soothed. Empaths often provide that feeling naturally. Some toxic individuals recognize this immediately on a subconscious level. Narcissistic personalities especially are highly skilled at detecting emotionally giving people, because narcissists crave validation constantly. Their self-esteem is unstable beneath the surface even when they appear confident externally. They need attention, admiration, emotional reassurance, control, and empaths unknowingly provide many of these things freely because they genuinely care about people. The empath listens deeply, supports emotionally, forgives repeatedly, tries to understand pain, gives second chances, and for manipulative personalities this becomes extremely valuable, not because they respect the empath's heart, but because they benefit from it. One of the darkest realities many empaths eventually discover is that some people are attracted to their emotional energy more than their actual personality. They do not truly love the empath as a person. They love the emotional comfort the empath provides. They love the validation, the attention, the emotional support, the patience, the calming presence, the constant forgiveness. The empath becomes emotional supply, and this creates deeply one-sided relationships where one person gives endlessly while the other mostly takes. At first, the empath may feel needed, important, connected, but slowly the relationship becomes emotionally exhausting because emotionally empty people rarely know how to pour back into others consistently. They consume emotional energy much faster than they can return it. Emotionally immature people often feel intensely drawn toward empaths because empaths reduce emotional discomfort without forcing accountability immediately. This is very important psychologically. Many emotionally unhealthy individuals want healing without self-reflection. They want comfort without change. They want understanding without responsibility. They want emotional support while continuing destructive behavior patterns. And empaths, because of their compassionate nature, often tolerate behavior far longer than other people would. They try to understand the pain behind the behavior instead of protecting themselves from the damage the behavior creates. This is why manipulators often feel strangely safe around empaths. Most people eventually challenge manipulative behavior directly, but empaths usually try to understand it first. They ask questions, they analyze emotional wounds, they search for hidden pain. And while this comes from kindness, toxic people learn they can use this empathy to avoid accountability. Every harmful behavior becomes connected to trauma. Every lie becomes connected to insecurity. Every betrayal becomes connected to emotional pain. The empath keeps searching for reasons while ignoring patterns. And toxic people survive through patterns. Many empaths do not realize how visible their emotional openness actually is. Their compassion shows in small ways, in how they react when others speak, in how carefully they choose words, in how quickly they forgive, in how uncomfortable they feel causing emotional pain to others. Toxic personalities observe these things carefully, sometimes consciously, sometimes unconsciously, and they begin testing emotional boundaries early. Small disrespect, small manipulations, small guilt tactics, small emotional pressure. They watch how much the empath tolerates. And empaths often tolerate more than they should because they believe understanding someone means staying loyal to them. This creates a dangerous emotional cycle. The empath sees brokenness and wants to help. The toxic person senses emotional availability and wants access. At first, the connection feels intense because both people are emotionally receiving something they secretly crave. The empath feels emotionally needed. The toxic person feels emotionally soothed. But eventually imbalance begins appearing. The empath starts feeling drained, confused, responsible for the other person's emotions. And the toxic person becomes increasingly dependent, controlling, or emotionally consuming. Many empaths are shocked when they realize how quickly emotionally unhealthy people become attached to them. But attachment formed through emotional relief can become extremely intense, especially for people carrying unresolved wounds. When someone feels emotionally abandoned internally, meeting a deeply understanding person feels life-changing. The brain releases powerful emotional chemicals during experiences of deep emotional validation. This creates strong attachment quickly. The wounded person starts associating the empath with emotional survival itself. That is why some toxic relationships become possessive very fast. The unhealthy individual fears losing access to the emotional comfort the empath provides. But the empath often misunderstands this intensity. They interpret emotional dependency as deep love. This is one of the most painful psychological traps empaths fall into, because emotional need and emotional love are not always the same thing. Someone can desperately need your emotional energy without truly loving you in a healthy way. They may panic when you leave, not because they value you properly, but because they fear losing emotional support. This is why some toxic people become extremely angry when empaths set boundaries. The boundary threatens their emotional access. Another hidden psychological reason empaths attract damaged people comes from emotional mirroring. Empaths naturally mirror emotions back to people. They reflect emotional experiences clearly. When someone speaks with pain, the empath responds with emotional understanding. This creates emotional intimacy very quickly, but emotionally unhealthy people often mistake emotional intensity for genuine connection. They become attached to how emotionally seen they feel. And because empaths are emotionally responsive, toxic individuals feel emotionally powerful around them. Some people spend their entire lives emotionally disconnected from others. Then they meet an empath who notices details nobody else notices. Suddenly they feel emotionally important, emotionally visible, emotionally cared for. And instead of appreciating this connection responsibly, they become emotionally dependent on it. The empath unknowingly becomes their emotional regulator, their therapist, their source of stability, their emotional escape from inner emptiness. What makes this even more dangerous is that many empaths secretly struggle with boundaries themselves, not because they are weak, but because many developed emotional hyper-awareness during childhood. This part is deeply psychological and often overlooked. A large number of empaths grew up in emotionally unpredictable environments. Homes where they had to monitor emotions carefully. Homes where conflict created stress. Homes where emotional instability existed constantly. As children, they learned to observe moods closely to stay emotionally safe. They became experts at reading emotional tension early. They learned how to calm others, avoid conflict, keep peace, protect emotional harmony, and over time this hyper-awareness became part of their personality. This is why many empaths feel responsible for other people's emotions automatically. Their nervous system was trained early to monitor emotional environments constantly. They learned that peace depended on emotional caretaking. So as adults, when they meet wounded people, their instinct is not self-protection, it is emotional management. They immediately try to help, calm, understand, heal, fix, support, even when the relationship becomes unhealthy. This childhood conditioning explains why empaths often ignore red flags for far too long. They are trained to search for pain beneath behavior. So when someone acts toxic, the empath immediately wonders what hurt them instead of asking whether the behavior is acceptable. They prioritize explanation over protection, and toxic individuals benefit greatly from this mindset. One of the most dangerous traits many empaths have is seeing potential instead of patterns. They focus on who someone could become instead of accepting who the person repeatedly shows themselves to be. This creates enormous emotional suffering because toxic people rarely reveal their full behavior immediately. In the beginning, many manipulative individuals appear vulnerable, charming, emotionally open, or deeply connected. The empath sees glimpses of goodness and becomes attached to the idea that healing is possible. Even after repeated emotional damage, they continue believing the person will eventually change. This happens because empaths often confuse understanding with excusing. They believe compassion means staying, loyalty means enduring, patience means tolerating. They over-explain harmful behavior constantly. They had a difficult childhood. They are emotionally wounded. They are afraid of abandonment. They do not know how to love properly. And while some of these explanations may be true, explanation does not erase damage. Pain explains behavior. It does not justify hurting people repeatedly. Toxic individuals often sense this forgiving nature quickly. They realize the empath will keep trying to understand instead of leaving immediately. So the cycle continues. Harm followed by apology. Distance followed by affection. Manipulation followed by vulnerability. And because the empath focuses on emotional potential, they keep hoping the good moments represent the person's true self. But psychologically, consistent behavior reveals character more accurately than emotional promises do. Another reason empaths stay too long is because emotionally giving people often attach deeply to emotional memories. They remember the vulnerable conversations, the moments of closeness, the emotional intimacy, the rare moments when the toxic person seemed loving, soft, or genuine. And these memories create emotional confusion because the empath keeps comparing current pain to past emotional connection. They become attached to possibility instead of reality. Some toxic people intentionally strengthen this confusion by revealing emotional pain strategically. When they sense the empath pulling away, they suddenly become vulnerable again. They share trauma, fear, sadness, emotional suffering, and the empath immediately reconnects emotionally because helping wounded people feels natural to them. Toxic personalities learn that vulnerability keeps empaths emotionally invested. This is why some empaths feel trapped in cycles they logically know are unhealthy. Their emotional compassion keeps overpowering self-protection. Every time they try leaving, guilt appears, responsibility appears, hope appears. They remember the pain behind the toxic behavior and feel cruel for walking away, especially because many empaths genuinely believe love means helping people heal. But healing does not happen through endless tolerance, and this is one of the hardest lessons empaths eventually learn. Some people do not want healing. They want emotional access. They want comfort while remaining unchanged. They want support without accountability. And empaths become exhausted trying to save people who are comfortable staying emotionally destructive. Emotionally unhealthy individuals often say they want love, but what they actually want is emotional control, emotional reassurance, or emotional rescue. True healing requires self-awareness, responsibility, honesty, and change. But many toxic people resist these things deeply. So the empath keeps pouring emotional energy into a relationship that slowly drains their identity. Over time, many empaths start feeling emotionally disconnected from themselves because they spend so much energy managing other people's emotions. Their attention constantly stays focused outward, on fixing problems, reducing conflict, providing support, understanding pain. And eventually they stop asking themselves an important question: how is this relationship affecting me emotionally? This is why emotionally damaging relationships often continue much longer with empaths than with other personality types. Empaths endure emotional pain quietly. They minimize their own needs. They adapt constantly. They tolerate emotional inconsistency because their nervous system became familiar with emotional instability early in life. Chaos feels emotionally familiar even when it hurts them. Many empaths also fear becoming cold or selfish if they stop helping others. This fear keeps them emotionally available far beyond healthy limits. They associate boundaries with rejection, distance with cruelty, self-protection with guilt. So instead of protecting themselves, they keep giving chances, and toxic people keep taking them. Some emotionally damaged individuals are not even fully aware they are doing this. Not every toxic relationship is intentionally evil. Some people genuinely feel emotionally drawn to empaths because they lack emotional stability internally. But without self-awareness, their attachment becomes consuming. They rely on the empath to regulate emotions they never learned to regulate themselves. The empath becomes responsible for maintaining emotional balance in the relationship, and this creates enormous pressure over time. The most painful part is that empaths often do not realize how emotionally drained they are until their mental health begins suffering. Anxiety increases, emotional exhaustion grows, self-worth weakens. Overthinking becomes constant. They start feeling responsible for fixing every emotional problem around them. And because they are deeply compassionate, they keep sacrificing their own peace, hoping the relationship will finally stabilize. But emotionally unhealthy people usually do not become stable through unlimited empathy alone. Without accountability, self-work, and emotional responsibility, toxic patterns continue repeating. And empaths often stay trapped because they keep searching for the emotionally wounded person beneath the harmful behavior. They keep hoping love will heal what accountability was supposed to heal. And this creates one of the deepest emotional conflicts empaths face. Their greatest strength becomes the very thing that exposes them to emotional damage. Their ability to understand pain makes them vulnerable to people who use pain as permission to hurt others. Their compassion makes them attractive to emotionally starving individuals. Their patience makes them vulnerable to manipulation. Their emotional openness makes them easy to emotionally depend on. So when toxic people show sadness, fear, vulnerability, or emotional pain, the empath instantly feels responsible. Responsible for helping, responsible for staying, responsible for understanding, responsible for saving the relationship, even when the relationship is slowly destroying them emotionally from the inside. But why do empaths stay even after being hurt? One of the most confusing experiences for an empath is realizing they are deeply unhappy in a relationship, yet still feeling emotionally unable to leave it. From the outside, people may look at the situation and think the answer is obvious. The relationship is draining, the behavior is toxic. The emotional damage keeps repeating. So why stay? Why keep giving chances to someone who keeps hurting you? Why keep returning to a connection that destroys your peace? The answer is far deeper than simple attachment. In many toxic relationships, the empath becomes trapped inside something psychologists often describe as a trauma bond. And trauma bonds are powerful because they are built through emotional confusion, emotional inconsistency, and emotional unpredictability. The relationship does not hurt all the time. If it did, leaving would actually become easier. The problem is that moments of pain become mixed with moments of affection, closeness, apology, vulnerability, and emotional intensity. One day the person feels cold, distant, manipulative, or emotionally harmful. Then suddenly they become loving again, soft again, attentive again, and those temporary moments create hope inside the empath's mind. Hope becomes the emotional glue that keeps the cycle alive. This emotional instability affects the brain in very dangerous ways. Human beings are deeply affected by unpredictability. In psychology, unpredictable rewards often create stronger emotional attachment than consistent behavior does. The brain becomes hyper-focused on emotional highs and lows because it keeps waiting for relief. This is why toxic relationships can become emotionally addictive. The empath never fully knows which version of the person they are going to receive. Sometimes they receive affection, sometimes rejection, sometimes warmth, sometimes silence, sometimes emotional closeness, sometimes emotional punishment, and the constant emotional switching creates anxiety mixed with attachment. The empath becomes emotionally exhausted while simultaneously becoming more emotionally attached. This contradiction confuses many people, but it is extremely common in trauma bonding dynamics. The empath slowly starts chasing emotional relief instead of healthy connection. They begin focusing on getting back to the good moments, the moments when the toxic person felt loving, emotionally open, caring, or deeply connected. And because those moments feel emotionally intense, the empath starts believing that version of the person is the real version hidden beneath the toxic behavior. So even after emotional damage happens repeatedly, they keep waiting for the loving version to return permanently. They tell themselves things like, "They were different before," or "I know who they really are deep down." But this is where emotional attachment becomes dangerous, because the empath is no longer attached to reality. They are attached to emotional potential. Potential can become emotionally addictive for empaths. They fall in love with possibilities, with future versions of people, with imagined healing, with the idea that love, patience, and understanding will eventually transform the relationship into something peaceful. And toxic people often reinforce this hope without realizing how destructive it becomes. After hurting the empath emotionally, they suddenly become affectionate again. They apologize emotionally. They show vulnerability. They promise change. They create moments of closeness that make the empath feel emotionally connected again. And just when the empath starts feeling hopeful, the harmful behavior slowly returns. This emotional cycle keeps repeating until the empath becomes mentally and emotionally trapped inside confusion. One of the reasons this cycle feels so powerful is because emotional pain followed by emotional relief creates a chemical response inside the brain. Stress hormones rise during conflict, rejection, or emotional withdrawal. Then when affection suddenly returns, the brain experiences emotional relief very intensely. Over time, the empath begins associating emotional chaos with emotional connection. Calm relationships may even start feeling unfamiliar or emotionally flat because the nervous system became conditioned to emotional unpredictability. Many empaths do not realize this is happening. They simply feel emotionally obsessed with fixing the relationship, even while suffering inside it. Another painful part of trauma bonding is that the empath often blames themselves for the instability. Because empaths naturally self-reflect deeply, they keep searching for ways to improve the relationship from their side. They ask themselves if they are too sensitive, too emotional, too demanding, or not understanding enough. Instead of recognizing unhealthy patterns clearly, they internalize responsibility. This creates even deeper emotional attachment because now the empath believes saving the relationship depends on becoming better, more patient, more loving, or more emotionally supportive. Toxic people may also use emotional vulnerability during critical moments to keep the empath emotionally invested. When they sense distance, they suddenly reveal pain, sadness, trauma, fear of abandonment, or emotional suffering. And because empaths are highly responsive to emotional pain, their protective instincts activate immediately. The empath stops focusing on the damage they experienced and starts focusing on helping the other person emotionally again. This is why trauma bonds are so difficult to break. The empath keeps shifting from pain into rescue mode, from self-protection into emotional caretaking. The relationship becomes psychologically exhausting because the empath never feels emotionally secure for long. They constantly analyze behavior changes, mood shifts, emotional reactions, and small signs of connection or rejection. Overthinking becomes constant, anxiety becomes normal. Emotional peace disappears slowly. Yet despite all this pain, leaving still feels emotionally terrifying, because the empath remembers the emotional highs so vividly. Those moments of closeness felt real, deep, intense, meaningful, and the empath keeps believing those moments can become permanent if they just love harder, understand more, or stay patient longer. But often the loving version they are chasing was temporary from the beginning. It appeared during moments of emotional need, emotional insecurity, or emotional control. The empath was not experiencing stable love. They were experiencing emotional inconsistency mixed with attachment. An inconsistent affection creates stronger emotional confusion than constant affection ever could, because the empath keeps trying to solve the emotional puzzle. They keep waiting for stability that never fully arrives. Many toxic individuals are not emotionally stable enough to maintain healthy connection consistently. Their emotional wounds, insecurities, need for validation, fear of abandonment, or desire for control eventually overpower the temporary warmth they showed in the beginning. But the empath stays attached to the memory of what the relationship could become. This is why so many empaths remain emotionally connected to people long after the relationship becomes unhealthy. They are grieving emotional potential more than emotional reality. And while the empath is trapped inside this emotional cycle, another hidden psychological dynamic often begins happening beneath the surface. Many emotionally insecure people become deeply attracted to empaths not only because they feel comforted by them, but because they secretly envy them too. This part is rarely discussed openly because envy does not always look like hatred. Sometimes envy hides behind admiration, attachment, attention, or emotional dependence. Some people are drawn toward empaths because the empath carries qualities they secretly lack inside themselves: emotional depth, authenticity, calmness, emotional intelligence, kindness without manipulation, genuine compassion, inner softness. And for emotionally insecure individuals, these qualities can trigger complicated emotional reactions. Psychology describes this through projection. Projection happens when people unconsciously react to qualities in others that connect to unresolved feelings inside themselves. Someone emotionally disconnected from their own emotions may feel uncomfortable around an emotionally aware person. Someone deeply insecure may feel threatened by genuine authenticity. Someone emotionally empty may become obsessed with emotionally deep individuals because they secretly crave what they do not possess internally. And instead of healing their own emotional wounds, they become fixated on the empath's energy instead. This creates strange emotional dynamics in relationships. Some people admire the empath openly, while simultaneously resenting them privately. They feel emotionally drawn toward the empath's peace, but also irritated by it. Because the empath's emotional balance silently exposes their inner chaos. The empath's kindness highlights their emotional coldness. The empath's emotional awareness exposes their emotional immaturity. And instead of using that discomfort for self-growth, insecure people sometimes respond through manipulation, jealousy, emotional control, criticism, or emotional draining behavior. This is why some people slowly become emotionally competitive with empaths without obvious reason. The empath may genuinely support them, encourage them, and care for them deeply, yet the other person still becomes resentful over time. Because insecure individuals often compare themselves emotionally. The empath's ability to stay compassionate, calm, understanding, or emotionally grounded can unconsciously trigger feelings of inadequacy inside others, especially people who secretly feel emotionally broken. Some toxic individuals become emotionally attached to empaths while simultaneously trying to dim their light. They want access to the empath's emotional warmth, but they also resent how emotionally genuine the empath feels. So they begin criticizing small things, creating emotional guilt, draining emotional energy, testing boundaries, creating confusion, or slowly lowering the empath's self-esteem. Not always intentionally, sometimes these reactions happen unconsciously because insecure people often project inner pain outward onto emotionally safe individuals. This is why not everyone who admires your light truly wants the best for you. Some people are attracted to your energy because they want to feel better around you, but they are unwilling to grow emotionally themselves. They want your calmness without developing inner peace. They want your emotional support without becoming emotionally responsible. They want your kindness while continuing emotionally destructive behavior patterns. And eventually this creates imbalance because the empath keeps giving emotional energy while the other person keeps consuming it. Some insecure individuals also become uncomfortable when empaths begin setting boundaries or emotionally pulling away. At first, they loved the empath's kindness because it benefited them. But once the empath becomes more emotionally independent, more self-aware, or less emotionally available, resentment appears. The toxic person may accuse the empath of changing, becoming cold, becoming selfish, or acting differently. But in reality, the empath is simply becoming healthier emotionally. Toxic individuals often prefer empaths who lack boundaries because unrestricted access feels emotionally convenient for them. Empaths sometimes struggle to understand why people become hostile toward them even when they genuinely tried to help. The answer often lies in emotional projection. Hurt people frequently project inner frustration onto emotionally safe targets. The empath becomes emotionally available enough to absorb emotions other people refuse to process themselves. And because empaths naturally try to understand behavior compassionately, they tolerate emotional projection far longer than they should. This emotional pattern becomes even more painful, because many empaths genuinely believe love can heal almost anyone. This belief often comes from compassion, but it can also come from unresolved emotional conditioning. Empaths tend to see the wounded child inside emotionally harmful people. They focus on hidden pain instead of repeated behavior, and this creates one of the biggest mistakes many empaths make in relationships. They try to heal everyone. At first, this feels loving, noble, compassionate. The empath believes that with enough patience, support, understanding, and emotional safety, the other person will finally change. They believe love will inspire healing, so they keep giving emotional chances. They keep forgiving behavior that keeps repeating. They keep sacrificing emotional peace, hoping the relationship will eventually become healthy. But healing does not happen because someone else loves you hard enough. Real healing happens when a person becomes willing to face themselves honestly. This is the painful truth many empaths eventually learn. You cannot heal someone who is comfortable remaining emotionally destructive. You cannot love someone into accountability. You cannot emotionally carry people into self-awareness while they continue avoiding responsibility for their actions. And yet many empaths spend years trying to do exactly that, because deep down they believe abandoning wounded people makes them cruel. Some empaths become emotionally addicted to being needed, not in a selfish way, but because helping others gives them emotional purpose. They feel valuable when supporting people emotionally, important when calming chaos, needed when rescuing others from pain. And toxic relationships strengthen this pattern because the empath becomes trapped in constant emotional caretaking. The relationship revolves around managing the other person's emotions, problems, insecurities, wounds, or instability. Over time, the empath slowly disappears inside the relationship. Their needs become secondary. Their emotional exhaustion becomes normal. Their boundaries weaken. And because they are so focused on healing the other person, they stop noticing how deeply they are damaging themselves emotionally. They confuse self-sacrifice with love, endurance with loyalty, emotional suffering with emotional depth. But healthy love does not require destroying yourself to save another person. Healthy connection does not constantly drain your nervous system. It does not leave you emotionally anxious every day. It does not repeatedly force you to abandon your own emotional needs for someone else's comfort. Empathy becomes dangerous when it turns into self-destruction. Many empaths stay in harmful situations because they keep focusing on the emotional pain behind toxic behavior. They think understanding pain means tolerating damage, but understanding someone's trauma does not require accepting emotional abuse from them. Compassion and boundaries are supposed to exist together. Without boundaries, empathy becomes emotional vulnerability that toxic people can exploit. This is why emotionally mature people understand something many empaths struggle to accept at first. Love without accountability becomes enabling. If someone continuously hurts others without taking responsibility, endless forgiveness will not heal them. It may actually protect them from facing consequences that could inspire real change. Some people only begin healing after they lose access to the emotional comfort they took for granted. The empath eventually reaches a painful realization. Some people are not looking for healing. They are looking for emotional supply, emotional rescue, emotional stability borrowed from someone else. And once the empath sees this clearly, transformation begins slowly. Because healing for the empath starts the moment they stop believing their purpose is to save everyone. This transformation is difficult at first because empaths often feel guilty when setting boundaries. Saying no feels uncomfortable. Pulling away feels cruel. Emotional detachment feels cold. But over time, they begin realizing boundaries are not punishment. Boundaries are protection. They are emotional filters that separate healthy connection from emotional consumption. Empaths who heal begin developing discernment. They stop focusing only on emotional pain and start paying attention to patterns. They stop asking, why are they hurting, and begin asking, how is their behavior affecting me? This shift changes everything. Because toxic people survive through emotional access. When the empath finally stops giving unlimited access, unhealthy dynamics begin collapsing. Pattern recognition becomes one of the empath's greatest forms of protection. Instead of getting lost in emotional words, they start watching consistent behavior. Instead of chasing emotional potential, they start accepting emotional reality. Instead of over-explaining red flags, they begin trusting discomfort. This does not make the empath less compassionate, it makes them emotionally wiser. Another powerful change happens when empaths learn emotional detachment. Emotional detachment does not mean becoming cold, uncaring, or emotionally numb. It means learning not to absorb responsibility for every wounded person who enters your life. It means understanding that someone else's pain is not automatically your duty to carry. It means supporting others without sacrificing yourself completely in the process. This lesson feels uncomfortable because many empaths built their identity around emotional giving. But endless emotional giving without boundaries creates burnout, resentment, exhaustion, and emotional collapse. Healthy empathy includes self-protection. Healthy compassion includes discernment. Healthy love includes standards. The moment an empath stops trying to save everyone, something surprising happens. Many toxic people lose interest because unhealthy individuals are often drawn toward emotional overgivers, people with weak boundaries, people who tolerate emotional inconsistency, people who constantly self-sacrifice. Once the empath becomes emotionally grounded, emotionally aware, and harder to manipulate through guilt, unhealthy people often disappear naturally. They no longer receive unlimited emotional access. And this becomes one of the biggest turning points in the empath's life. They finally realize their peace matters too. Their emotional safety matters too. Their nervous system matters too. They stop abandoning themselves to keep others comfortable. They stop shrinking boundaries to avoid disappointing people. They stop confusing emotional exhaustion with love. The empath begins attracting different kinds of relationships once they change internally. Because emotionally healthy people do not seek emotional control or emotional rescue. They seek balance, mutual care, respect, consistency, accountability, emotional maturity, and for the first time, the empath starts understanding what healthy connection actually feels like. Calm instead of chaotic, stable instead of unpredictable, safe instead of emotionally draining. The deepest transformation happens quietly. The empath no longer feels responsible for fixing every broken person they meet. They begin understanding that someone else's healing journey belongs to them. Compassion still exists, but self-abandonment disappears. And slowly, the empath stops attracting people who feed on emotional energy because they stop offering unlimited access to it. So no, your empathy was never the weakness. Your ability to care deeply was never the problem. The real danger began when you gave unlimited emotional access to people who only came close to you for comfort, validation, control, or healing they were unwilling to do themselves. And that is why so many empaths end up exhausted, confused, and emotionally drained. Not because they are weak, but because they kept pouring love into people who only knew how to take from them. Some people will look at your kindness and feel safe. Others will look at the exact same kindness and see an opportunity. That is why emotional awareness matters so much. Because the right people will appreciate your energy without trying to control it. They will respect your boundaries instead of testing them. They will protect your peace instead of feeding on it. But the wrong people will slowly consume everything you keep giving until you no longer recognize yourself. And many empaths learn this lesson too late, after years of overthinking, emotional burnout, trauma bonds, and relationships built on emotional imbalance instead of genuine love. The hardest truth is that not everyone who feels drawn to your light deserves access to it. Some people are attracted to your energy because they secretly lack what you naturally carry inside yourself, and once you finally understand that, your entire view of relationships begins to change. You stop chasing emotionally unavailable people. You stop confusing pain with love. You stop trying to heal people who refuse to heal themselves. And most importantly, you stop abandoning yourself just to keep others comfortable. If this video felt deeply personal, it's because many empaths silently experience these patterns without fully understanding the psychology behind them. You are not the only person learning this lesson the hard way, and you are definitely not alone in feeling emotionally drained by the wrong people. If you want more deep psychological insights about empathy, human behavior, toxic relationships, attachment, and emotional intelligence, then subscribe to The Silent Empath and become part of a community that truly understands these experiences. And if this video connected with you, take a moment to like it and share it with someone who keeps giving their energy to people who never truly deserved it.